Well, thank you for joining us for this conversation on housing innovation. You saw some of the incredible videos and you met some of the winners. We're going to dive a little more deeply into that subject right now. And to do that, we have a fantastic group of panelists and discussants with us today. So we're going to go down the line, have everyone introduce themselves. We're going to get into what they do. So I'm going to ask actually our panelists not to go at length into who they are, because hopefully these questions will help you understand what they do and how they do it. But if you could give your name, what you wanted to be when you grew up, when you were a child, and what you are actually doing today.
I guess I'll start first. My name is Clint Lee. As a child, I think I wanted to become a scientist or astronaut. And I think there was one point that I wanted to become a bus driver. So I grew up in Korea, and then every morning I used to take a public bus to school, and then the bus was always full. And then we had this bus driver that was, had a big steering wheel with a big shifter, driving the bus, and it was just fascinating to watch him drive the bus. I work in LA County Public Works Building and Safety Division. I'm a senior civil engineer. I manage building plan check section right now. I believe what I do right now is very similar to what the bus driver was doing, that he was in charge of the safety of all these young students, getting them from one place to another place. So it's been very rewarding for me to help public build their dream homes, or trying to add an addition to their existing house because they have a baby coming in. So it's been very rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Miha Rizdan. When I was little, I wanted to be an attorney to help poor people, which is what I recall telling my dad, and go to Harvard. Those were the two things that a young Korean girl aspires to. And today I am the director of Housing for a Community of Friends. We are a nonprofit organization that develops permanent supportive housing for people who are homeless and living with mental illness.
It is also Miha's birthday today. Woo!
Happy birthday.
Today must be like a day. Is anyone else having a birthday today that we might not know about? Let's do a quick happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Miha. Happy birthday to you. Woo!
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. John?
Well, that's hard to follow. My name is John Masseri. When I was a child, I first wanted to be a veterinarian and then a physician. I should have listened to my guidance counselor. I ended up as the CEO of the People Concern. We're a nonprofit housing and social service provider for people experiencing homelessness and victims of domestic violence.
And my name is Kevin Harai. When I was a child, I can say I wanted to be a magician. I was a junior member of the Magic Castle. And I think what I'm doing now is not too much different in that trying to make what would seem impossible possible. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Flyaway Homes, and we were born out of the People Concern to figure out how to address this homeless crisis that we've had and deliver supportive housing.
Well, thank you. That actually is a perfect segue to my first question, which, John, I want to start with you. So people, you might not have heard, if People Concern sounds like a new name to you, you might not be familiar with it, but you may be more familiar with LAMP or OPCC, which are the two organizations John helped to merge to grow the People Concern. As you do that, and you both organizations were absolute leaders and still are in the field of homeless services, but what made your board of directors spin off Flyaway and get involved in this business of building housing?
Yeah, so for us, we've spent 55 years, I think, working very hard on outreach and engagement. We know how to do that. We know how to get people housed, and we know how to keep them housed. But we can't do that work without units on the back end. And at the current rate of production and the current cost, we are never going to get to scale. And so in the last couple of years, we've been spending a lot of time thinking about what does it mean to get to scale, because we heard from not only the people we were serving who were getting very frustrated because they were backing up in the interim housing. Many of them had vouchers that they couldn't use. as well as our staff who were working with our clients, that the number one missing link was more available units. And so we set about, we had a permanent supportive housing committee. And by the way, we've been doing permanent supportive housing for decades, not as a developer. We had actually, frankly, always resisted the idea of becoming a developer because there are so many good developers working in the space, and our sweet spot was really the supportive services. And we know in permanent supportive housing, the housing doesn't work without the services. So we'd spent a lot of time perfecting the services part, but we kept coming back to the same issue, which is we didn't have enough units to move people into. And that journey, really, through our Permanent Supportive Housing Committee, we also decided we were spending too much time talking to ourselves. We were very insular because we were very comfortable in the traditional development model and working with developers. And I want to say, and be really clear about this, that our excitement about the disruption in the system is not because we think developers are doing a bad job. Our colleagues are working very hard doing really important and good work, but they're working within a system that's constrained and structurally, frankly, broken, and it has created this bottleneck, high cost, long time of production. And so our goal was not because we thought anything bad was happening, it was that something better had to happen faster, especially with the numbers that we're looking at in Los Angeles. And so we brought together financing experts, developers, not traditional affordable housing developers, although we had a few of those that were involved as well, and looked at could we create an opportunity to do something different. And that was the genesis of what became Flyaway Homes.
So John mentioned this system. So Clint, I'm wondering if you could unpack that for us a little bit. So, we hear about the 24, 36 months or even longer sometimes that it takes the building to make it through the planning and permitting and all of that process. So why does that take so long? Can you walk us through some of all the steps that it takes to build?
Sure, yeah. There are a few items I could think of that could be time-consuming because complexity of a project as well. First, you have to submit to a planning department for entitlement. And then you could be as simple as a site plan review, which is a ministerial permit process, but you may have to obtain a CUP, which requires to have a public hearing and whatnot. And also, because of the CEQA requirement, you may have to prepare environmental documents to mitigate all the environmental impacts that are caused by a project. So it can take some time, but once you have an entitlement done, then you want to hire architect, civil engineer, structural engineer, and then go ahead and prepare the construction plans and then submit that to building and safety for plan check and permit. Building and safety works as a clearinghouse for construction permits, so all the other agencies' approvals need to be obtained prior to a permit issuance, which includes public health and fire department and whatnot. And also the fire department is another key agency for development services. They look at fire access, hydrogen location, fire flow, sprinklers, fire alarms, and so forth. So if you don't have enough access, then you may have to go widen the road, or if you don't have enough flow at the existing hydrogen, then you may have to work with the water company and then get them out there, increase the flow so that the fire could approve the project. Another delay that can be caused is the sewer study. Let's say a developer wants to propose a 200-unit apartment building. You want to make sure the people that live there are able to shower and then flush toilets, right? So you want to make sure the existing sewer system does have extra capacity. Otherwise, then you may have to go ahead and upgrade that sewer system. So these things kind of add up and then take time and then cost money. As we try to streamline the process, there's always opportunity to improve. But my recommendation is to always seek for professionals. There are professionals that are out there, like the panelists over here. They know the process and they've done the work. So if you're a successful businessman who wants to give back to the community by building affordable housing units, don't take on the project on your own. Seek help and then talk to the professionals who know how to do things.
We are going to have an acronym pop quiz at the end of this panel, so CUPs and CEQAs and all of that. I hope you're keeping up. So Mihei, so we've read about this on headlines. We also saw it on some of the videos. Prefab, right? Modular. It's in this code of manufactured housing, or that's what it's called more officially. And on the face of it, so some of what Clint talked about, the building and safety concerns, it feels a little bit like a no-brainer of, feels like it would just solve everything. So I'm curious, for you as a leader, longtime leader in this field personally, but now working at a pioneer and leader in supportive housing building, you guys have been incredibly successful. Tell me what's keeping us from just doing this with everything. What am I missing in thinking this should just be for everything?
Sure. I think to understand sort of the reasons, I do want to go a little bit into more detail about some of the constraints that John was talking about, because that's sort of the lens with which we, ACOF, and I think a lot of other developers in the affordable housing industry are kind of looking at these opportunities. So one of the major constraints is that we have a tried and true way of producing affordable housing, supportive housing, and it's layering a number of different financing sources that have a lot of different requirements. And that in and of itself, so there are things that take time and money. And so layering all those financing sources take a lot of time. Putting actually that money to work in a project also takes a lot of time. And so, and it's really complicated, and they come with a lot of requirements. So, this concept of, right, like trying to create something cheaper and faster within that construct is tricky. There's also just the complexity of the development and construction process, which Clint has referred to some of the issues, but it's difficult to find a site in the city of LA or in the county of LA. There's a lot of constraints on sites, and the development process itself is tricky, and there's a lot of unexpected things that happen. So I think flexibility in the design and development and construction process is something that we value a lot. Something that our financing sources require is, people putting money in, you have to be able to deliver within a certain time frame, within a certain level, and being able to control that process to say that, when we say we're going to finish by a certain time and we say we're going to deliver X, Y, and Z, we have to do it, or there's significant consequences to the developer in our ability to pursue more projects. So that's a really big concern in trying something new, or maybe untested. And then there's regulatory requirements. There's a lot of public policy objectives placed on affordable and supportive housing projects when government agencies put their funding in. And so, there's a lot of things being achieved through our projects, which also adds cost and time. And then there's a quality issue. I think over time, a lot of us have moved towards individual units, especially the population, the community of friends serves, when it's people who are formerly homeless, living with mental illness, kind of the durability of that building, the durability of everything that we put in there raises cost as well. And then there's a lack of competition. And so, there's only so many contractors, so many subcontractors who are willing to put up with or deal with all the paperwork and the requirements that all these funding sources and government agencies and regulatory requirements require. And so that lack of competition, the shortage in the labor workforce raises costs and money. So when we look at, what's a potential solution to, build something cheaper, faster, we're looking for something that we feel like we can deliver on, and to do that, the solution has to address a lot of these different factors. I think for us to feel like, okay, let's go ahead and do this. And I think today, so we did a lot of research actually. I think a lot of us have been looking at manufactured housing, shipping containers, different ways of constructing. Are those solutions to the problem? And I think in our research, we interviewed many architects who've maybe worked with manufactured housing or different types of construction. We've talked to other developers. We've been in many conversations. And we have found that there's not a lot of people who can say that it was cheaper or that it was faster. So when we're looking for something that we can tell our funders and everybody that, yes, we know we can do this, it's a little bit harder to show. We can't, and then another part is, one group which gave me pause was they're a fully integrated firm. And so they design, they manufacture, they construct, everything. And they said, we always miss something. It takes a lot of coordination, and that's a lot of risk. So if a firm that controls the entire process is saying that they miss a lot of things still, and the only benefit is that they can only blame different parts of their own company, and so you don't have to worry about a lawsuit, that kind of gives us reason to pause as well. And then there's a loss of flexibility. Manufactured housing, shipping containers is, you have to commit to a certain design very early. You have to, pick a manufacturer very early, and you have to pay money very early, much earlier than the normal process. And so once you start going down that path, there's very little flexibility, my understanding is, to change. And in a lot of several stories I've heard, there's a lack of competition. There's only so many manufacturers. There's only so many subcontractors, people who can put these things together, and several of them have gone out of business. And so, or there's a lack of competition there because there's so few people with that experience or people who can manufacture. So that limitation of choices, it doesn't necessarily seem like it's addressing the lack of competition process. And again, it seems uncertain. We're putting public money towards something that, projects have run into trouble when the manufacturer runs out of business, and they own the plans, so there's a lot of things that give us, again, reason to pause. And then I think more recently, in conversations about manufactured housing or shipping containers, in an effort to reduce costs and to make it faster and house more people, which are great goals, a lot of the conversation has shifted to significantly smaller units than what we traditionally have been building, and in some instances shared housing. And for at least a community of friends, when we, the way we look at housing and what we feel is a certain level or certain quality of life that we want to deliver to our tenants, and also based on conversations with our tenants, it seems like shipping containers and these smaller modular units would be a reduction, at least for us, in terms of quality. And then the shared housing situation also, we can talk about that a little bit more later. We feel it doesn't necessarily work for our target population.
Thank you. So we will hopefully can get back to the shared housing piece, but I do want to ask Kevin on that operational. Mihai mentioned a lot of valuable considerations on things that are uncertain about the process and the risks involved that someone would have to take on manufactured housing. Tell me what you guys did to mitigate that. How did you approach those risks?
Sure, thanks, Chris. And I think, first of all, I can sympathize with Mihai's challenges, and understandably so. When you're in this construct of multiple layers of financing that have different requirements, not only from the lender's perspective, but also, you're talking about constructability, and it impacts the timeframes. I think that these are all major considerations that slow things down. But in the Permanent Supportive Housing Committee of the people concerned, we were really focused on the path of least resistance. So to that end, when you talk about modular, some of the challenges are the fact that it's not established. It is not, there are no, tried and true, and this definitely works, here's a perfect model. But I think, to quote John, we didn't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so what we're working on right now, we don't claim to be the model, the end-all model. We're working towards improvements and making that process more manageable so that it is more predictable and there are fewer risks. And I completely understand the argument when you're dealing with public funds, and you wouldn't want to take those risks. I understand that. The beauty of what Flyaway is doing is that we're completely private, and we're not beholden to a lender or to a government entity, and so we can think differently. And so the thought behind modular is that to Clint's point, right? Why does it take so long, 2 to 4 years, to get a building permitted? A lot of it has to do with getting the systems permitted, the electrical, the plumbing, the basics that you would think about when you're building an apartment building. When you talk about modular, it's a factory-built housing product. So what that essentially does, it creates everything above the foundation. It's approved and permitted at the state level. And then all you're talking about is getting permitted at the county or the city level is a foundation and the site work. So really the advantage to modular is that it simplifies things in that I'm not asking you to get a 3-story multifamily building permitted. I'm asking you to permit the foundation, which has been engineered for a product that's going to be placed on top. And when you think about it in those terms, to get a grading and foundation permit is much easier and is a matter of 4 or 5 months. And in those 4 or 5 months while it's being permitted and built, the factory is building the building. And theoretically, again, once this is worked out and perfected, and we're just at the beginning edge of this industry, I feel, then it will be a great marriage. At the end of that 4 months, after the permitting is done, the foundation is built, then here comes the building, and you're done within a year. That's sort of the concept behind modular. But to Mihei's point, there aren't very many companies out there that are executing or that can point to a building. This is especially a multifamily building, right? There are retail installations in Long Beach, but they don't have the same plumbing systems that you do in the living situation. So that is sort of big picture, the advantages of modular. I totally recognize that it has a ways to go. I can tell you that what I feel is going to really drive that innovation and that perfection is companies like Katerra, like SoftBank, that's backing Katerra, companies like Amazon and their Alexa fund that are backing Plant Prefab, and Plant Prefab and Brooks and Scarpa, the way that they're thinking is modular with flexibility. So again, we're not there right now. We are constrained by these modules. It is not the perfect world. 4-bedroom, 1-bath may not be the perfect shared situation. I think Flyaway is working towards a 2-bedroom, 2-bath shared still living situation, which we feel would be ideal, but this is all in flux. So what we're talking about is thinking about things differently, the path of least resistance to really deliver the housing that we need. And so, to John's point, we're not knocking any of the existing, developers, methodologies that are out there. We're just trying to supplement where we can.
Two follow-up questions on that. How do you manage to do it without any public money? I'm sure many folks would like to know what that even looks like at a basic concept to do it without public money. So let's start there. How do you manage to do it without public money? So when you say you're able to do it without dollars with strings attached and those things, what's the basic idea of how you manage to get it done without any public money?
I think there are a lot of people out there that want to help. And I think that there is real capital that would love to get involved in this. They just don't have a means to that end. And I think that, as an example, how did our first project get funded? Family and friends that were interested in seeing this pilot through. How did the second project get funded? There was an article in the LA Times. People reading the Times read this article, and they were real investors that said, great, if this is a way I can invest my money, I'll do it. And there was $4 million for the second project. And so I think that, and there's a pent-up demand. I think that we have forward commitments for future projects. And so it's just a matter of giving investors an avenue to basically put their capital to work and impact this issue, which I think Flyaway is a great model because when you talk about social impact equity, you can directly track what impact you're making, right? If you invested $125,000, you can go see the bed that you're providing for what XYZ per people, right? So I think that that's another attractive aspect of what Flyaway is doing.
Got it. So many follow-up questions, but we'll hold and let you all ask some of that too. But Clint, Mihei raised a lot of things about what's going on in the process. You started with some of it, but we have a lot of cities here at this conference. A lot of cities are trying to figure out what they can do. Typically, cities hold the land use laws, and a lot of that housing development process is there. So what are you all doing? What do you hope cities do more of to help this process be actually more expedited?
Yeah, as most of you know, January 2017 is a big landmark for affordable housing because state passed a law to allow accessory dwelling units (ADUs). That's a different concept of housing because typically in the past the zoning did not allow rental units on your single-family lot. So this is the opposite, or they encourage people to put rental units in the backyard. So it was very new to everybody. So we had to create a guideline, basically ADU guideline. What the guideline has is it has what agencies are required. If you have a fire department, what stuff they need to look at. So the homeowner get a hold of the guideline will know they need to submit to planning, building and safety, fire, and so forth, and what they're looking for. The guideline has a lot of FAQs. It has a lot of challenging questions and answers to it. The one most common question that I get is that, do I need to put in a separate utility meter? And then the guideline has the answers for those questions. We received about 600 ADU applications last year within the LA County unincorporated area. That's about a little more than 10 plus ADU applications per week. We didn't have that workload before. So we had to hire additional staffing to handle the load. And we have some contract companies that are standing by so that we don't cause any delays in the process.
Just a quick break. Everyone know what ADUs are? Granny flats in the back where you might have lived as a college student or no?
So we had to do that. And also, Kevin mentioned about cargo containers briefly. And then cargo containers, the way you manufacture is not really per building code. So building code doesn't really have any provisions to use a cargo container as a building element. We had to come up with a policy to come up, to allow that as an alternate method. We had to work with the neighboring cities, Long Beach, Santa Monica, City of LA, to come up with a policy. We started online electronic plan check process. So you as an owner or architect, you don't have to come into our office. You could submit applications, pay fees, and then you could do that from your home or from your office. And then once the plans are ready, you'll get notified by email that your plans are ready. So we're doing a lot of innovative stuff. Our department wants to become the most trusted agency in the region. So we're always trying to look for innovative ways to improve our service and then serve our community.
Wow. In the process, I think bottom line, supportive housing, the point of it is to help our homeless neighbors come inside, right, and thrive, right? We heard a lot about it. It's not about just staying in, but really how do we connect back with the community and how do we all have the lives we want. So in your models, Mie, Kevin, despite them being different, I imagine you share the same bottom line. And John, I know that's certainly true for you. So tell me a little bit about the design elements that you put in place to ensure quality service delivery, to ensure kind of high quality of life. So Mie and Kevin, we'll start with you guys. And John, in your history of work, please jump in too.
Ladies first.
And it's
Yeah,
my
it's your
birthday.
birthday.
And it's my
Birthday girl's
birthday.
first.
I get to do everything first today. No. So we haven't built a project yet. We're just, in the past year and a half, we've been laying the groundwork to do what is a pilot project for a community of friends. But in the way we're thinking about it is, Chris, will I tell them what the model is later?
Oh, yeah. So that's a good point. So I meant just kind of in building so far, just generally, what's important in
Sure.
supportive housing generally. But to get back to your point and to your question, so you talked about some of the concerns and considerations. So yeah, how else might we think of innovation here? So
Okay.
if not manufactured housing, if not shared housing, what else is possible? What should we think about in innovation?
So I'll quickly tell you a little bit about the model and then the kind of what we're including in terms for services. So our thinking is that after talking with a lot of people that there are developers out there who are building using traditional construction at much cheaper and faster rates than what the affordable housing community has been doing. And part of that is kind of coming outside, just the way the Fly Home model is, outside of the traditional financing, public financing system. And so, our thought is that we would build the just traditional stick-built wood frame construction, probably smaller though, than what we would typically think of in a traditional tax credit or publicly financed project, and be able to build that much faster and cheaper based on people we've talked to who have done that. But they are the market rate developers, these smaller market rate developers. So with that thinking in mind, from our design standpoint, our goal or intent would be to have similarly sized units as what we're building now, but maybe a little bit smaller. Not as small as what some people are proposing, but probably in the 400 to 500 square foot range for studios and one bedrooms, and to keep the same types of amenities because we are using kind of the traditional stick built. So for us, having that space for community and service delivery is very important. So we would still have the community room, the offices for case management on site, managers, and similar amenities as we're offering right now.
And so just to put a bow on it, so how it's able to still be cheaper and quicker with traditional methods is the size of it? Is that?
It's a little bit of the size. So of the factors that I mentioned, so coming outside of the public financing system, that enables us to not have to comply with all of the requirements that are currently put on traditional affordable housing projects. It also enables us to use private financing. So just the process of getting commitments or putting the funding together. Right now, on a public, putting together a traditional affordable housing project with multiple layers of public financing, that alone will take 1.5 years to 2 years.
Yeah.
So, just using private financing in and of itself kind of speeds that process up a lot. Closing on that financing, once you get it all, also takes at least 6 months because you have all these financing sources and each of them have a team of attorneys and lots of documents. So again, getting out of that in and of itself saves a lot of time. And then, going with a slightly smaller building, I think, utilizing a lot of the same things that, like trying to go by right, minimizing the parking, coming up with a building or finding a site that would allow us to have on-grade parking, those types of things that also raise cost. And then, what we talked about, the competition or the limitations of the contractor pool, going outside of that pool. So when we don't have all the public funding requirements and all the compliance requirements, we're able to access a very different pool of subcontractors and general contractors who are used to building differently and who are building much more cheaply.
So tell me a little bit about that, and we'll get back to the design question, John and Kevin. But so as you do both kind of builds with public financing and just private financing, what are the pros and cons of each? You mentioned the cons of the public pool. You have to go to multiple rounds to get the millions you need with the strings attached. But why not then go all to private financing? It sounds easier, so I'm just genuinely curious what keeps us from privately financing all of this?
Equity. So I think, a quick lesson in affordable housing. So the way affordable housing or supportive housing is affordable is you have to reduce the operating expenses. Supportive housing is very expensive to operate. Because we have more staff, we have a lot of community space that our tenants need, and so and we need those things for our target population. So what we have to do is the public money is something that we don't have to necessarily pay back on a monthly basis. So that enables us to reduce our operating expenses and still deliver affordable units. So something has to take its place, and that's equity. And nonprofits, generally, we don't have a lot of equity to put into deals. So kind of the fundraising that you are doing, that's the critical piece where, we don't have a lot of money sitting around that we can just throw into a project as equity. And part of the scalability of it is to be able to raise sufficient funds then that you can repeat this process.
So what I'm hearing is the secret is lots of money sitting around. So if you all have lots of money sitting around,
Well, can I just mention, Chris, sort of the thesis of the Flyaway Homes model goes back to, in order for this to be scalable, it's got to be a real estate investment, and that is what enables the capital to be raised that gets these buildings built. So,
great, yeah. And on that point, feel free to add on to that, John. And then if you could transition also to this question of what are you guys doing in terms of design, even in this faster and quicker, what are you feeling like is important to maintain as design elements?
So this issue, the question of quality is important. Faster and cheaper isn't schlock. The goal was not to create substandard units to just warehouse people. It was really how do we use good, thoughtful design in smaller units that still incorporates. We house people with serious mental illness, with substance addiction, with chronic health conditions, and usually some combination of all of those things. So accessibility, durability, the ability to create a therapeutic community, which is really important because in our organization, it's not just about getting people housed, it's about keeping them housed. And you keep them housed when they feel a sense of belonging, and when there is a community of support around them. So that was really important in the first Flyaway project because the lot is fairly small. There is a lot of outdoor community space. There's a community room for the residents to gather. There's on-site case management space as well. So we weren't willing to sacrifice those elements. They're smaller than we would like, but as we move forward with new projects, we're already looking at ways to reconfigure the design. So we don't feel like we have an organic garden, we have a pet area, there's an outdoor barbecue area, there's lots of congregate space for people to sit and to gather. So that was very important to us, and it was something that we weren't willing to give up in order to just make it faster and cheaper. I will say, and I know we're going to get into shared housing a little bit more, I think it's important to understand that, shared housing isn't for everyone. It is a choice. We have used shared housing for 12, 14 years in our agency where we master lease units and shared housing is not a new concept. It's been used in housing seniors, in transition age youth, many of us when we went to college. So it is not a new concept. It's used in recovery. It has not been used in wide scale for housing homeless people. So we have to understand that it's not something that's going to work for everybody, but it works well for many people. And we also talked with the people that we serve, and by and large, most of us would like our own unit. We have also found that many times when they don't want to live with 50 or 60 other people in an interim or congregate facility, they're very happy to move out of that. But when people move into their own units, it's often a very lonely and isolating time. And we're supporting about 2,000 people in permanent supportive housing and scattered site and project-based, and so we see different configurations. And I can tell you from our experience, we've had many residents. The most extreme example of this is a woman that we've been working with for about 6 years. She's been in 3 separate independent units. She's had to surrender all 3 of them because she decompensates and simply cannot live alone. She's been in a shared unit for 3 years and is doing really well. Now, that is one person, and I'm not holding shared housing up as the end-all and be-all. It is not. I would ideally like to see Flyaway get to, a smaller unit that offers some flexibility, and in the buildings have some flexibility. We're not there yet because on the manufacturing side, we need some time to develop that. But I think the idea of kind of dismissing shared housing as if it's a poor quality of life for people is just simply not true. And the idea that people would not choose shared housing is also not true. And finally, I would say sleeping on a sidewalk or in a tent or freeway overpass is certainly no quality of life for anybody.
Thank you. So we want to break for a second to hear from you. I mean, I imagine many of you are experts in what you would consider quality. So whether you've lived in supportive housing or supported someone living in those kind of units, I guess as a warm-up to the audience questions, I'm curious, what element of life quality or kind of things that you've seen are needed or helpful, what are you curious about how this generation of shared, or not shared housing, if this generation of supportive housing supports? So what have you seen as needs, things that are really critical, and you're curious how does that work in this generation of supportive housing? Yeah. So we have one. Do we have a mic, or am I? Yeah. Let's do this mic.
I just have a question for actually two. One for Flyway Homes. I know that you sort of got your minimal Kishani with the Housing Authority, LA County, CDC. Okay, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so Flyway Homes, and you've got your sort of minimal viable product, if you will, done. What does it look like for version 2? I know that it was just a test model and some things didn't quite work the way you wanted to, especially with the shared housing component, and just wondering if you're still continuing with the container model and if that's still viable. And the second question is for the person from Public Works. If you have kind of like this really new type of technology, then how does that work? That's for Public Works, really. Like if there's something completely just sort of breaking the box, how does somebody get through some of the constraints and the timeline for that to happen?
Sure. Do you want to start, Clint? Go ahead, honey. Go ahead. So, what was the question exactly?
Are you settled?
No, yeah, I don't, and I think that John mentioned some of these elements. I think it's a complicated question. John mentioned some of these elements that we're working towards that would be ideal. You asked about version 2, and that happens to be made out of shipping containers. But I think we're expressly saying that we're not married to the shipping container. I think that modular construction makes a lot of sense. But I don't think, again, it has to be that the shipping container base. And then looking forward, I think that, again, we're looking at how to find the right partner to really scale this with and then tweak it so that we bring in some of these design elements that we'd like to but aren't able to at this point. Does that give you a better understanding of sort of where we're going? And second one is containers, shipping containers, but I think the third one, I have a feeling will not be. It will be modular construction, but not based on the shipping container module.
What would some of your takeaways be from the first one then? Like, what would you not do?
So lessons learned, that there is a lot to be learned in the modular industry, and that we're not really there, and that there are a lot of really smart people working really hard, and that everybody recognizes that there's a lot of potential there. It's just who's going to crack it first is sort of where what I've learned is where we really stand, and I don't think that the answer is there yet.
I agree with that, and I think that we have a kind of an upside down model right now, and that we have a lot of raw materials. I'm speaking about shipping containers. There's a lot of available product, but on the manufacturing side, you don't have a lot of manufacturers, and we don't really have anybody locally. So when you're talking about trying to develop something that can be replicated over a period of time, you need to have the manufacturing capacity, and we're not there yet. I think in the next 3 to 5 years that this will be that the demand will drive the market, and I think that you're already seeing manufacturers. They're out there, but I think they will begin to scale, and I think we're going to see a movement where it will not be as challenging right now because the manufacturing pool is fairly limited, and so that reduces our ability to scale as quickly as we like. But I think as more of these projects are done, you learn by doing, and each one gets a little bit better. And on the manufacturing side, I think when manufacturers see an opportunity, as they see more of these kinds of projects being built, whether it's for permanent supportive housing or for other uses, then we'll begin to see kind of the backside ramp up.
Just to dig into that for a second, when you mentioned these challenges that you've seen or still are exploring, so you mentioned one on a local production plant or a manufacturer. What else? Like, what are some of the things where you've tried it and you know that's not where you want to do again? So you mentioned bedroom configuration size is one of them. Anything else that you've learned already, and then what any other specific questions you're still testing as you move forward?
So from the service delivery side, as I mentioned before, we want to get to a place where the indoor service space is larger. It's smaller than we would like. It's there, and it's workable, but it's not where we would like it to be. So I think that is one thing that we're looking at in terms of the configuration. The second thing is, as I mentioned before, the idea that we could have, perhaps 1-bedroom or studio units and 2-bedroom units in the same building would be ideal, so that there's more flexibility and you can really build a community. So those are the two things that are top of mind for us that we keep pushing on, and I know our partners at Flyaway get very annoyed when we keep saying, but we'd like this, but we'd like, and it always comes back to money, whether it's private money, public money. It always comes back to, we're not immune from land cost and construction costs. We have the same constraints as everybody else does, but we keep pushing, and I think we'll get to a place where we will be able to perfect some models that actually will be replicable and scalable.
Great. There's a second question there, and then we'll go to Bill.
My name is Chen Ho Liao. I'm San Gabriel City Council member. 2 years ago, I attended this National League of Cities convention at Nashville, Tennessee, and we already have a vendor that provides mobile home. The one that they display is a beautiful, beautiful modern mobile home. It's a studio type with ADA accessibilities and ADA ramps. And at the time, I thought, oh, well, this is great for LA because we have so many vacant lands abandoned by the county, by the city. So if we put those mobile homes, and then it will be mobile homes for homeless. And each unit, prefab manufactured mobile home, only $25,000. So compare $500,000 we spent for one unit. That's night and day difference. And it's faster, so much faster.
So the question is mobile homes. Why aren't we doing them everywhere? Seems so easy. Anyone can take this, or I can pretend to have an answer.
So land is really expensive here, and part of the way we can make a project pencil is some of it is the density, and the scale at which we need to build in order to meet the need for housing. So given how expensive land is, a one-story mobile home, you wouldn't be able to get that many units on that site. And so I think right now with vacant land that you can develop multifamily housing on is relatively scarce. I think, we're very interested in trying to build as many units as we can in each parcel of land that we can get our hands on, and still build, a really good community and a quality project.
And then also I know Kevin kind of mentioned it about manufactured homes or modular units. Modular units or manufactured homes are not permitted through the local cities or counties. They are actually reviewed and inspected by the state agency, ACD. And then difference between the Tennessee mobile homes and the California mobile homes are because California is very seismically active, so they have to design for earthquake, which manufacturer, if I have an outside of the state manufacturer trying to get that unit permitted within the California, I could see some challenges where they have to do extra testing to make sure that that unit can sustain the earthquakes that we have here. So I do see that there's a difference where good manufacturers that are very popular outside of California, they want to expand and then build their homes in state of California, and then they do run into challenges like that. And then as a county, it's easier. We, as the counties or cities, do not have to permit the building itself. We only permit and inspect the foundation and then connection. So whether it's coming from outside California, Tennessee, Arizona, we welcome any manufactured homes, but they have to go through the state of California for approval and inspection, and then I know they require some testing to be done before they permit that, so that can be a challenge.
And I think just to add to that, and Bill, if we'll go to Bill for the next question. I mean, I think the pop-up shelters are an example of that, right? They have used the tent, mobile home, trailer concept. John's organization's operating one of them. In addition to the land, the grading costs, it costs a lot of money to prep the land, to do the hookups underneath of it for electricity and sewer and water. And there's also a lot of money required on the back end underneath, in addition to the land prep. I totally forgot what I was going to say. I'm not even going to pretend to say the next piece. But there are a lot of costs in addition to the actual building itself that you'd be surprised by that add to the cost of the project. So a lot of times that cost is just literally the construction. The $500,000 per unit includes land, the financing, all of the prep for the site as well. Bill.
Yes, Bill Wong, City of Pasadena. A super quick question for Clint, and then a deeper question for John and Miha and everybody else.
Yes.
So for Clint, many jurisdictions to promote ADUs as affordable housing will provide a reduction in impact fees. So in Pasadena, if you build a one-bedroom ADU, the impact fee is $20,000. If you agree to become a Section 8 landlord for 7 years, your fee is $900. So County of LA hasn't done that yet, and so there's a question. My question is, why not? So that's my quick question for you. But for everybody else, so we have two projects going on right now in Pasadena. One is permanent supportive housing for homeless seniors, mixed-use building, subterranean parking. We just got council approval. It'll open in about 4 years and cost about $30 million. Okay, so that's one that we have going on. We're happy to get that. It took us 3 years to get to this point. The other one is we're buying a single-family house that needs little or no rehab, and we're going to use it for shared housing. And there are still places, not in Pasadena, but elsewhere in the county, where you can get a 3-bedroom, single-family house ready to roll for $500,000. And then you don't have to do the development. Wouldn't that be a model that's even faster than developing a prefab house? So what do you think about that?
So building and safety doesn't not have any impact fees. I feel like that's maybe geared toward maybe planning department or maybe CEO's office. But whether it's an ADU or another unit, the building fees are based on the valuation of the project. So it really depends on the square footage of the building. So there's not going to be any additional cost for ADU compared to other additions.
Okay. I think shared housing, as John has said, it is a model of housing that does work for some people, but it isn't necessarily for everyone. And so it is probably a way to produce housing more quickly for some folks for whom shared housing does work. One of our concerns, and a concern that came up with shared housing when we were talking with our tenants and our case managers and our property managers too, is people really need to understand when they come into shared housing, if you're homeless coming into shared housing, what that actually means for them and their options, if they don't want to stay in that situation for the long haul. And I think supportive housing, or the power of supportive housing, to end homelessness is the stability of households once they move into housing and whether they stay housed for the long haul. And you know, not everybody wants to stay in a shared housing situation, you know, for the rest of their lives. And while many of us probably lived in some kind of roommate or shared housing situation when we were younger, we had the means and options to move out of that when we were ready to move on. And that's not always true. Once, you know, for someone who's homeless or formerly homeless, once they move into housing, they lose that status, and it's harder for them to move on to a different type of housing, like if they wanted to live on their own and get a one-bedroom unit or a studio. So I think, you know, for those who are moving into a shared housing situation, you have to make sure that they understand what the potential implications are, and then, you know, as a community, we have to have other housing options available for those who don't want to go into that situation. So I think that could work for some, but I don't think it's a solution for everyone.
Yeah, as I said before, I don't think shared housing, I don't think any one housing solution works for everybody. I think my attitude about all housing development is we're in a housing crisis, and we need every tool in the arsenal. And you know, we need to look at adaptive reuse. We need to look at, you know, existing buildings that can be, you know, converted, hotels, motels, skilled nursing facilities, board and care, where we're not displacing people who are already housed. That's critically important because we don't want to contribute to the housing crisis. So I think for me, it's not an either or conversation, and it's and both. We need everything. And certainly if there are single family homes that are available and ready, almost move-in ready, or require very little rehab, you know, that is an intervention and a solution that works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. And so I think we have to be flexible and realistic that we don't have unlimited resources. And so we've got to target our resources in ways that make sense and move as many people into housing, into quality living situations. This is not about, from my perspective, coercing people, forcing people to live in situations that they don't want to live in. It's really honoring individuals' choice to choose what's available and best for them, with full disclosure and transparency, so that people moving into shared housing know what the limitation. There are benefits and there are limitations. And that is true in every kind of housing option as well. There are always benefits and limitations.
Thank you. Last question or thought? Stephanie.
I feel badly being the last. It sounds like it needs to be really important. My question, John, one, thank you for what you just said. It is absolutely true that it needs to be this and that, not this or that. We do need to do every option in the book. One of the things with any form of the prefab homes, flyaway homes, the different models, in terms of bringing it to scale, is seeing how you can link it to publicly financed deals. Because, you know, yes, you guys are building it and you have a model of how you're paying back your investors. But there are also resources for developing permanent supportive housing that we want to tap into, and we want to use those resources with a more affordable model. We proposed one of the Triple H sites in the city of LA with a prefab model. It didn't end up being any cheaper or any faster once you're using the public money. So it's not necessarily the construction in and of itself, it's the requirements that the public sector puts on the construction that add to the costs. And people really need to understand that. It's not like we're building something fancier. It's that we're required to do prevailing wage and A, B, and C, and D. So do you envision a model of your product that can be brought to scale using public sector dollars?
So the short answer is I hope so. You know.
That wasn't really necessarily for you, John.
Oh, wasn't? Oh,
No.
okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no.
Go ahead, Kevin.
No, I would say, John, take it.
We can both answer. Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
The short answer is I hope so. You know, we don't know yet. As you know, there are the the current system has multiple regulations and constraints that are just there. And as I said earlier, you know, this is not about finger wagging bad people doing bad things. It's a system that I believe is fundamentally broken for all the reasons that we have identified. Nonetheless, it's a system that we have. And I think the question and the challenge with H and HH, these are public dollars. And so at the end of the day, how much flexibility is there going to be on a go-forward basis? I think that, you know, using some of the H dollars to put out the innovation challenge, I think was really bold and, pardon the pun, innovative. It's nice to see that. And I think what you're seeing is that more developers are stepping forward, and even some of our colleagues and traditional affordable housing developers are beginning to look at things from a new lens. But at the end of the day, we can all only do this work, you know, if we can unleash the resources that are available and match them in a way that makes sense. So I don't know ultimately, you know, will prevailing wage, will the compliance issues that are, you know, so burdensome for, you know, a lot of developers, will those be scaled back? Will they be modified? Will there be exceptions? You know, I don't know the answer to that, Stephanie. I hope that through more work being done and delivering quality product, and by the way, I mean, Kevin can speak to this, but on the flyaway projects, it's not like they're paying people, you know, $6 an hour. The trades are making good money, well above, you know, scale. So it's not, this is not trying to do everything on the cheap or to reduce people making a decent wage. So I know that's kind of a long, rambling answer to your question. I wish I had a crystal ball and could say I know how it's going to end. I'm hopeful that I think there is a recognition, at least in all the time that, you know, I've been involved in this work, there's always been the, you know, complaints about everything's so complicated and it costs so much and it takes so long, but it feels like we're starting to have real conversations about that, and there's a recognition that something fundamentally has to shift if we're going to get to scale. Because in the current model, we're plodding along. We'll all continue to plod along, and great projects will get done, and people will get housed, and there will still be thousands and thousands of people living on the streets. So until we break through on the back end, and that's really up to I think our elected officials, you know, and our regulators to say how far are we willing to push the envelope if we really believe that we have viable solutions that can be scaled, but we need some relief on some of these constraints. We'll see.
So Kevin, the question to you on, does your model work with public money if you had to take public?
So we've been tempted over the past couple of years, and it's like every time we get drawn in, we figure out why we can't, you know, and it's the same for the same reasons, is that there are these constraints. So now what's happening is, I think the conversation is, how do we sort of take some of the constraints off of those funds so that they can be leveraged, like with groups like us or Flyway and other developers that can utilize them. But right now, the answer is we can't use them for the different reasons that we don't fit within that framework of government taking public funds to develop this sort of product.
Housing Innovation Challenge.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly what that addresses, right? Is how do we do this, and how can that collaborate with the understanding that these are public resources that we have to protect. And so it's that balance, and it's figuring that out. It's not easy to do, and I think that is, like, to John's point, the elected officials have to kind of take some leadership and own that and really, you know, push that.
So in closing, I mean, I think that the takeaway message is this isn't easy. So if you were here for the magic answer, sorry to say that we're not walking away with it. But I think that's the point, right, of this discussion here. But I want to go down the line. So obviously there are builders in the room, and our charge to the builders is to keep going at it and trying all these things. But what can everyone else do? So is there a role that any of us can do to help this along? And we can just go down the line.
Well, I think that we're always constantly battling this NIMBY, these NIMBY factors that are out there. So I support the YIMBY, philosophy, and I think that that's really the voice of everyone in. So I'm a big advocate for the Everyone In campaign.
Ditto to that. I think we absolutely need a groundswell of concerned citizens who have enough, collective outrage about this issue that we keep pushing. And then I think we need leadership from our elected officials and the regulatory bodies to lean into these issues, and unpack some of them and be willing to take some chances, not to be, cavalier with public funds, but to create a different system.
In addition to what the other panelists said, I think, I agree with Stephanie. It'd be great if we could make something like this work with public funding. And I think part of it, helping us get there, I think could be the collection of good data. And in order, as we are trying things out, as we're looking at different options, if we can bring and produce data that can hopefully show over time, if certain changes were to be made, what impact would that really have? And I think, as we're all going about our work, if we could keep an eye towards that, knowing that, we're trying to make a case for something else, and learn from whatever, each experience so that we can improve each time, that would be great.
Building and safety also has some challenges about public funding projects because now, the DSA puts different requirements for housing units that are funded by the public money. So there's additional requirement that we have to review as well. I think the collaboration between the agencies, just like I said, when we created the ADU guidelines, we had to work with the fire department, sanitation district, trying to find out what they're going to do with the ADU, how to collect fees based on the new connection. Is that a new residential unit, or is that addition to the house? So we had to work together to come up with a guideline. Hopefully that's very helpful for the community and the property owners. I encourage all the cities and counties to do the same. Talk to your fire officials, talk to the planning department. Make sure that you guys are on board, because you don't want to have homeowner coming in, you tell them one thing and then they go to another agency and then be told something else. So collaboration is a key for the work that we do.
Thank you. I think a couple other things that came up, Pastor Lisa, who gave the invocation this morning, came up afterwards, and she was saying thank you for the work she's doing with the Everyone In team about taking her parcel that her congregation has and using it to build housing on. It sounds so easy, it's incredibly hard. And so I think that kind of, again, something that takes time and energy to work together on. That's a model that Genesis LA is doing together with people. The issue of equity and private, what does it look like for the real estate investment community to get in? So if any of you do have, you might not have piles of cash in your apartment hanging out, but if you know bankers or other people who are looking at financing in different ways, who might be part of the conversation, I think these are all things that will help us move along. There are two opportunities. This comes at a timely moment, because there are two things coming up with public money that we want to try to figure out how to use better and more effectively. So I mentioned before, and I'll mention maybe three things. So the city of Los Angeles taking $120 million of its Triple H dollars to look at innovative housing solutions. So that will be coming out March, April timeline in terms of that RFP. The county has a alternative housing NOFA that's putting in $10+ million to face this $12.5 million to look at this concept. And also the No Place Like Home money, there's $230 million of that, which is designed to try to be more flexible to work around it. So the third thing I'll mention, even the city implementation grants that we talked about this morning that Measure H is funding, I know a lot of those cities are trying to do innovative things. Bill mentioned a couple of things. So there are these opportunities where public funds are aiming to be more nimble. And I think we are in this season of trying to figure out how to work with that. And so the Funders Collaborative, the Home for Good Funders Collaborative, is trying to help and prepare applicants to use and take advantage of that. So again, if you're a private banker or those things and you want to figure out how to prepare traditional stick-built developers or innovative ones to jump in and take after those, please join us. The California Community Foundation is a lead and a funder in that work for the accelerating permanent support housing areas. So expect that to come out within the month to help prepare applicants for both the city and the county opportunity. And again, we shouldn't have this conversation. We shouldn't do it because it's easy. We should do it because of our mission to house and end homelessness, right? Even I did remember what I was planning to say earlier, which is that, you know, these pop-up shelters, they're costing millions of dollars, right? The actual structure doesn't cost that much, but when you grade and when you hook it out, they're costing $3 to $5 million per project to do. And so it is none of this. I don't think anyone here who's done it would say, that was actually easier than I expected it to be. If you've ever faced that, I don't think that's true. But again, that shouldn't deter us. And I want to thank the panelists for having an honest conversation with each other. And I know many of you have additional thoughts to add to that. Please join us in that conversation. We're about to have it at 3:25 to kind of cross-fertilize some of these things. Please approach us to have the conversation more directly. But if we could get one more hand for the discussants today and for their hard work.